Hey, Mike.
Hi, Jason. How's it going?
Good. Thanks for coming on.
Absolutely.
I came up with the title of this podcast sort of last minute called Museums Are Everywhere.
That is
Part,
true. They are
yeah, I
everywhere.
mean, part of it is a little bit of a sort of a nudge against, the big places that, people think are only in New York and DC and out in California and the big cities,
Right.
but they really are everywhere. And the people that work in them are everywhere. And, nothing against the big places. I think they're wonderful, but I think, there are a
Yeah.
lot of really cool smaller places too. Um,
Yeah, there are. They seem to be in every town, every state, and they all got really interesting stories to tell. So yeah, I love them.
yeah. Yeah. So again, thanks for coming on. Can you tell the listeners, well, who you are and where you're working now?
Sure. My name is Mike Connelly, and I am currently the executive director at the Newcastle Historical Society in Delaware. And it's a small museum. We have a couple of historic house museums, a gallery space in another historic building, used to be a library. And then we have our administrative office and some event space and a visitor center in an old arsenal building in the middle of the town. So it's a great little place.
So you're managing quite a few properties then.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And a number of different properties and a number of like little small businesses, from like a museum to a rental program to a retail store. So it's all a little bit different. Keeps life very interesting.
Yeah, well, I hope we can get into the running of the business aspect because I think that you have a lot to share there. And when we were talking before we started recording, we mentioned about your background being in business, and I think in some banking, right? Correct?
Yes, yes. In another life, I worked in the credit card industry. So I tell people now that I'm working in museums, I'm trying to save my soul. Uh,
That's
but
great.
yeah, being in Wilmington, banking and credit cards in particular were that was the industry in the 90s up into the early 2000s. So I worked for one of the large credit card issuers here, and it was great. I worked there for 13 years. And a lot of what I learned from that company, they had a lot of good principles. They called them precepts about customer service and how do you treat people, and what kind of um, service levels do you want to provide. You always kind of want to exceed people's expectations. So that translates to anything that you do, I think, ultimately, and anywhere you work. So I brought a lot of that stuff with me into the nonprofit museum world, and I still use it every day, really.
Did you go to school for business or?
Yes, yeah, I went to University of Delaware, and I was a finance major. Um, so that was undergraduate, yeah.
Okay.
And I don't like accounting. Like accounting is very detail oriented, and finance was kind of like, oh, well, it's a little bit bigger picture, I think. So that sort of suited me a little bit better.
I mean, did you have a moment where you got out on a ledge or something and you're like, I'm going to work for museums, or what happened? Was there a defining moment that you just thought, man, I'm going to try something different?
Yeah, I think so. I ultimately blame Colonial Williamsburg for this whole thing, because when I was at the bank, we took a trip down to Colonial Williamsburg, and this was like in the early 90s. And it was the first time I'd ever been there. I was really interested in kind of um, what they did down there in terms of living history and how they were interpreting history and telling stories to people, because I hated history in high school and to some degree in college. But when I got down there, I was like, oh, this is really pretty fascinating. And so I got involved in doing some like living history things on the weekends as a result. Um, and I've always liked old houses. So my wife and I moved into Newcastle, where I work, which is a National Historic Landmark District, and we've always had old houses.
Okay.
So sort of combining a love of old houses with history, and I like the Revolutionary War era. Um, Somehow I was like, what do I do besides, banking with this interests? Like, what is there to do? Can you have a job that combines this somehow?
Yeah.
And so I started looking around at, what kind of possibilities there were for that. And I hit upon historic preservation to kind of combine my interest in buildings. And at first I was thinking it'd be a lot of fun and challenging to actually do restoration work on buildings. I do like carpentry. So I'm pretty good with wood. Keep me away from wiring or plumbing, that kind of stuff. But wood is okay. And so I started thinking about that as a possibility, but then I was like, nah, I'm a little long in the tooth to get started in carpentry at this point. Because this was when I was, I don't know, mid-30s maybe.
Okay.
And so I said, well, what other possibilities are there? And it struck me that, managing a historic site would allow me to sort of satisfy that need for history and for historic preservation. And at the same time, allow me to use this, 13 years or something of business experience that I had. And as it turns out, that seemed to be a pretty accurate description of what I do as an executive director and administrator at a historic site.
And so around what time was this, like, around what year was this?
So this was 2003 when I left the bank and sort of delved into, I went back to graduate school. I went to Goucher down in Towson, Maryland. They had a distance program in historic preservation. And so that suited me because I needed to keep working to pay the bills. And at the same time, I wanted to go to school. So that worked out well. It took about, I want to say 4 or 5 years. I forget what it was to complete the master's program there. Because it was pretty part-time. So, but it was a good program. I definitely would recommend it.
Going part-time?
I'm sorry.
You were working and then part-time going to school?
Yes. And
Okay.
then somewhere along the way, in the first year or so, I started looking around for jobs with museums, and I found one down in Baltimore, which is
Oh.
about an hour and 15 minutes away. So it was a bit of a commute, but there was only like 2 red lights between me and the museum. So it was all
What was
95.
that place?
It was called Mount Clair Museum House, and it was down in Carroll Park, right in Baltimore, very near Raven Stadium. So
Oh, is there a train that goes out that way from the B&O?
yeah, the B&O Railroad takes their little excursion like right past it. So we were basically neighbors around the block from the B&O Railroad Museum.
Yeah, was that arrangement set up during your time or?
Yes, it actually was. They just started getting that excursion train going, probably like the last 6 months or so that I was there.
Okay.
So yeah, it was pretty neat. Kind of a rough neighborhood, not exactly the type of museum you'd expect to see sitting in that area, but there it was up on this big hill in this park.
Wow.
It was pretty interesting museum for sure.
How many months or years were you there?
I was there about 3 years.
Okay.
Yeah, and then it just happened to turn out that I was doing part-time stuff here at the Newcastle Historical Society, just being a guide basically in the houses on the weekends. And they had a part-time director. I'm sorry, they had a full-time director at the time, and she kind of wanted to step back and get back to her first real passion in museums, which was education. So she suggested hiring a new director, and she kind of knew that I was involved in this now. So she sort of talked to me and said, "Hey, what do you think about possibly coming up to Newcastle?" So I interviewed, and it worked out pretty well. I only lived like 4 blocks away, so
I was gonna say, yeah, you were settling down there in Newcastle.
yeah, for sure. So I was already interested in the town, already knew the history, and like I said, it's kind of when you're dealing in a museum that is your hometown, I think you have strong connection to it, obviously, and that kind of helps with the passion and the dedication and all that.
One of the questions that John Verrill and I were that I asked that we were talking about is how job hunting in the museum profession, the evolution of it since he was talking about finding jobs in the 60s and 70s.
Oh yeah.
And even that time getting going to with the Newcastle? Have you seen changes, or what are some of the changes or similarities you've seen in terms of trying to get a job?
Yeah, it's I think it really comes down to a network of, who do you know? And are you kind of in the loop with what's out there and what organizations are changing and what might be coming up. So I think having a good network of people that you've come to know through your time, whether it be if you're a grad student currently and you're doing internships, talk to the folks that you're working with and ask them like who they know, if they know of anything coming up, or if your colleagues, just kind of keep chatting about, museums around the area and let people
Mhm.
know if you're looking for a change too, you know, because they might say, hey, I know this that might suit you. You never know what might pop up.
Yeah, it can cut both ways for
It
people. I
can.
know. I went on an interview one time, and I don't know. You can call me superstitious. You can call me Obi-Wan Kenobi, but I could feel the force in the room that they already had their person picked out, and they just had me there
Right.
because they needed to interview people. And I just thought,
Gotcha.
goodness gracious, if you're going to do that, here's my recommendation. If you're going to do that, do it over the phone. Don't make
Yes.
someone drive an hour to come do because you have to interview them. It just
Yeah,
drives me crazy.
I would agree. Bad practice.
Yeah, I mean, or I don't know much about the legal side of things, but I'm wondering if it's one of these myths that if you're an institution, you have to interview three people. If you've got, maybe with a government job,
Yeah, I
but
would think it's more like along that line.
yeah,
I've interviewed for a few like state jobs, and it's a very, to me, who's always been in sort of the private sector, it's very weird the way a government interview goes because it's all very regimented. They ask you exactly the same questions. They don't stray from that. They're working off a sheet, and there's no like, you can't riff on somebody's answer and really, get into something with some. Whereas in the private sector, you can have a more fluid interview.
yeah,
And I don't think there's any rules about, how many people you have to hire, or if you have to, or I'm sorry, how many people you have to interview, or honestly, if you have to interview anybody, you can just hire someone if you want.
yeah,
Depending, unless you're constrained by some, larger organization.
yeah, or some quirky thing in your personnel policy or
Bylaws or something.
something.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah. So you're at this point in your career, you're with the Newcastle Historical Society.
Mhm.
Um, and you were with them for some time, and then you did some consulting, and then went back.
Yeah, I
Okay.
was here when I left Mount Clair down in Baltimore. Um, I actually came up to Newcastle and was here for 8 years. And during that time, we sort of moved out of our offices out of the bedroom of a historic house into the location where I am now, the Arsenal, which is a much bigger space and more centrally located. And then shortly after that move, I ended up going to work in some other places in southeastern Pennsylvania for a couple of years. And that was kind of cool because I got a chance to see how other organizations did things, and they did things differently than we did. So it was kind of neat to have some time with other organizations to learn different perspectives, different approaches to doing things, maybe learn things that I was ignoring before that I shouldn't have been ignoring, and that kind of
Mm,
thing. So bring some things back to the table. So when I came back here, I was actually in a consulting role. My predecessor had just taken a new position, so I was kind of filling in as a consultant to be the interim director. And after a while, I was kind of getting into the groove a little bit, and I was kind of like, well, I have a bit of background, so I can, if you want to hire me just full time, I will sort of save you the learning curve that you would have, the
right.
12-month learning curve if you brought somebody in that's completely cold and fresh. So
Yeah.
yeah, we tried it out for a couple months, made sure everybody was cool with it, and then yeah, so then it came back. So it was interesting, coming back. A lot of things are very much the same. And by very much the same, I mean, like after 5 years, I found one of my frozen lunches in the refrigerator in the historic house. I was like, okay, wait, how is this still here?
Yeah, they weren't
So,
cleaning it
and
out, I guess.
then, yeah, so that was pretty funny. But then other things are very different, and we have new ways of doing things and some new processes and stuff that I had to learn when I came back. So,
So this is going to sound really cliche, but and this might be across the board for a lot of historical societies, in regionally or if not nationally, at least county and local historical societies. I mean, aside from funding, we'll put funding aside. I mean, what do you feel like you're really struggling with, or maybe you're not struggling with anything?
I think one of the biggest challenges I have is kind of prioritizing and getting things laid out in a organized fashion. As I kind of mentioned at the beginning, at the Historical Society, there's a million different sort of things that we do. We operate these museums, and operating a museum in and of itself, there's a bunch of different facets to it, as you know, from collections to interpretation, and all the things that go along with it. Then you have a retail store and a visitor center that you're trying to run, and you're trying to rent your facilities to people that want to have weddings and birthday parties, and you're marketing all these different things. And then there's, all the background functions that are going on. There's accounting and bookkeeping that has to happen, and all the administrative functions and dealing with membership programs and things like that. So all of these things need attention to some degree. And, I sat down with our staff and we spent about 2 days at the beginning of the year kind of going through what we wanted to accomplish this year. And we came up with like a 6-page document, and it is just literally a list. And I was just like, there's a lot to do. We're never going to accomplish all this stuff in a year. But going through that list, it helps sort of think about, all right, I got to work on this and this and this as a priority. But it is really challenging to me to be like, all right, today, which of these 500 things am I going to start working on today? Like, what's really the most important priority for me right now? And how do we make that happen? Because I think a lot of things, and you probably have experienced this too, it's like a domino effect. Like, you have this before we can do this, before all the pieces fall into place. So it's challenging, to say the least.
Yeah, I found that the balance of running the business and then trying to convey to the community the vision and the potential of your mission, that balancing act, it's almost like asking the local bank manager of, let's say, Bank of America. You have a bank manager, manage this bank, and then also convey to the region the importance of Bank of America on their lives and how it's impacting them. You wouldn't ask that of a bank manager.
No, right.
They would say, well, I'm the bank manager. We have our corporate office that is doing the commercials and the Super Bowl slots and doing the community. Like it's just that balancing act is can be crazy sometimes.
Yeah, it can be. And you can get bogged down in, there's so many little things that you can deal with at any given point. And, it's it kind of that old cliche too. It's like you're dealing with all these little things, and they're getting in the way of taking care of the big thing that's really important to deal with. And it's easy to put that off. And my wife came up with a great term that I use a lot. It's productive procrastination. And it helps you, you feel that you are accomplishing things because you're actually finishing tasks, but they're not the tasks that you should be accomplishing. Like you're putting off this enormous thing over here, but you're like knocking out these little tiny, easy to deal with things, where you should be like, I'm going to deal with this. And then kind of as my reward, I'm going to go back and do these little things that maybe I enjoy doing or whatever it might be. And then that'll help everything move forward a bit. So.
I'm sure you'll appreciate this. Years ago, I was working with a we're doing a financial audit.
Hmm.
CPAs came in, and there was this one guy, and he would look through our books, and under his breath, I would hear him, and he would be saying, spaghetti, 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 meatball, spaghetti, 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 meatball. And I thought, what on earth is he doing? And basically what he was in his mind, he was looking at the 0.42 cents and the $1.50, and he was just calling all that spaghetti.
Okay.
And then when he'd come across $7,500 or $10,000, he was calling those meatballs, and it was helping him arrange the things in his mind. But your story reminds me of how many of us in the moment just get lost in the spaghetti of, I gotta fix that frame over there, or I've got to clean out the fireplace behind, but there's
Absolutely.
this other meatball that we've got to tackle.
Right. I got this grant application over here that I have to write for, $150,000. But right now I really need to deal with that frame. That screw's been loose on that thing forever. I got to fix it.
Well, let's just get into that a little bit more before we move on. Like, why does that happen? Why, especially for executive directors or anyone in working? I mean, is it because we're getting thrown a lot of things at us, or is it because we decide to catch a lot of the stuff? I mean,
yeah, that's a good question. I don't know if it's human nature that you want to try and tackle stuff that either you just enjoy or you just, take the low hanging fruit first. What the psychology is there, I'm not sure. I'm certainly guilty of it, but it's a matter of, I just did it this weekend. Like this, I came in on Sunday and I was like, oh, I want to clean out this drawer files to get it organized. And then I applied for a PPP loan. So I was like, well, I'll clean out the files first. And then I almost went over to the file drawer and I was like, no, I'm going to do this PPP loan, which has been on my list to do for like a week. So I went over and sat down there. So, it took like 3 hours to get all my stuff together and do it. So then I finished up and, I spent like 25 minutes cleaning out the file drawer.
Yeah.
So I finally caught myself. I was like just ready to do it all over again. So it happens all the time.
It's almost like we need our own mini individual strategic plans of here are my big goals, my tasks, objectives, and they're helping me in my professional life work toward this, whatever it is you're working toward.
Yeah.
But then who's got the time to sit down and do something like that?
I know. And that's one of those things that you kind of have to make yourself do at some point. And there, there's not enough time in the day to do everything. We have a couple of new staff members here, and they've been working with us here at the Historical Society for a long time as interpreters. And so they actually came up, and one is the kind of our administrative manager, and then the other is she's the public programs manager. So they're kind of getting their first kind of look at the other side of the museums. And our administrative manager, I'm not sure if he was shocked by how much stuff is going on, but he was like, I can't get through my to-do list. I was like, you're never going to get through your to-do list ever.
Yeah.
And it's just going to keep getting longer and longer and longer. And that's just the way it is,
Yeah. I've been fascinated by the idea of chasing after when I get to this end, the finish line, then I can do this. When you come to the realization that there is no finish line.
No. There never is.
You're just going to grasp after the next thing.
Yep. I always have this fantasy that, once I get through December, January is going to slow down and I'll be able to catch up on some of this stuff. January never slows down. It's like you're dealing with the end of the year from the previous year. You're ramping up for the new year. And then before you know it, you're like off and running to the races again. And all that stuff is still sitting in the corner of the collection storage room that you haven't organized or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. So you actually, as one of the things that you do, you teach emerging museum professionals, people also in college, because you teach some at the University of Delaware, correct?
Yes.
And your focus is on finance and business and administration there?
Yes, it's primarily a class that focuses on budgeting and, what a budget is and how do you create one, whether it be a, project budget or a budget for your department, or for in a small museum situation, or if you get to the point where you're a administrator for the whole organization, like how does that budgeting process work and how do you manage it? Why do you do it to begin with? And so I find it pretty interesting. And uh, Casey Greer, who ran the program at Delaware for several years, was chatting with me one time. And we were sort of like saying that, we really need to teach, museum professionals more about business. They need to have sort of a little bit of a background, because you could be on the job first day and somebody comes up to you and say, put together a budget for this event or this project or whatever it might be. And if you've never done it before, you're like, what? What's a budget? How does that work? So you need to have a little bit of background there. So I talk a little bit about, in the class, I talk about, budgeting. I try to introduce the students to financial statements, mostly, the income statement or statement of activities for the nonprofit world, and the balance sheet. Or statement of financial position for the nonprofit world, to let them know, like, hey, these things are out there. They can tell you some things about the organization that you might not otherwise know. And we even cover the 990, the IRS form 990, which gets filed each time. And I try and make the point to them that, one, it's good to understand, more about your organization, and about your organization financially if you're working there. But it's also good, if you are thinking about going to work for an organization, you should ask them about their finances. And you want to find out if this organization is strong enough to hire you and can afford to keep you on. You don't want to uproot your life and, move to a new state, for example, and take a job and then find out that, that organization doesn't have the resources to keep you there more than a year. That's, that would be a depressing thing to find yourself in. So, that's kind of what I hope the class does, is introduce people to the idea that they should and really kind of need to know a little bit more about the numbers behind their organization.
Yeah, I think if you probably dug in deeper with a lot of colleagues, they could share stories about the sort of savior getting hired. Mm-hmm. The place has a year or two left in terms of but we're hiring you, but we're not telling you you are our savior, and you're going to turn everything around. And that seems to be a problem in the field, and it's like no one wants to talk about it. And it's tough. Yeah,
that's a very difficult situation to find yourself in, I would think. I haven't been placed in that particular situation at all, right, thankfully, but that would be, unfair to someone to bring them in and expect them to, turn around an organization or make it work when it hasn't been working in the past. There's a lot to undo, and it would certainly take more than a year to do that if it's really in bad straits, I would think.
Do you get into do you dig in and get into like how to set up a budget, whether it's going to be more aspirational or you're going to make it more realistic and deflate it, that kind of, do you get into that kind of stuff?
We do a little bit. I kind of take them through some real world examples from my experience here or at other organizations. I use examples like planning a small exhibit, planning a fundraising event or an outdoor event, a festival type of thing that we do very frequently in museums, and then planning an educational program, and trying to figure out. In some cases, the events would be brand new, like you've never done it before, so you're starting from scratch, and you have to figure out, well, I have never done this. How do I figure out what the budget's going to be, and how do I forecast revenue for something that's never happened before? Or if it is something that's been ongoing, and you're just trying to maybe expand a program or something like that, at least you have some historical data. So I take them through the ideas of how I might approach it. using historical data, using other organizations for benchmarks, different thoughts on how you might create a realistic marketing plan, and then help them prepare for all the questions that they're going to be asked by their board, because once you prepare the budget and you present it to somebody, they're going to have a lot of questions about it and ask you to justify where these numbers came from, because they're going to be making decisions based on that.
The budget, looking at an institution's budget is so, and then their 990, what the actual figures came out to be, can be really revealing for people that are about to take a job. I'm so glad that you brought that up, because I think I kind of instinctively knew that, but you talking about that has really made me think. You might look at someone's budget and they have this big event and it makes 40 grand, and the expenses are 38,000.
Yeah.
So you're like, wow, they've got a $40,000, budgeted event. Well, at the end of the day, though, understanding what that really means, it's $38,000 worth of work. And
exactly. In some cases, it's better to just go have lunch with somebody and ask them for $2,500 and forget all that work and just cash their $2,500 check, and you're done. And then you can do something else. So that's I'm glad you brought that up. That's a concept that I bring up a lot with board members and mostly board members actually, is opportunity cost, because a lot of times people have a real emotional connection to a particular event or program or something that might be going on, and it might be really, really labor intensive. And if the purpose is just to make money as a fundraiser, if you're not making a really good return on all that volunteer labor and staff labor, then it's not worth it. And not only are you putting all this time and effort into just making, a couple $100, if you rack up all those hours that you've spent on it, you could have taken all that labor and put it somewhere else and accomplished something else in the organization. And that's what I call the opportunity cost. You're giving up doing this because you wanted to do this instead. So there's that kind of non-monetary cost associated with really anything that you do. So
one of the to play devil's advocate, one of the things that I've heard is that big event kicks up a lot of dust, and you've got thousands or hundreds of people coming, and you're touching, there's those people, and they're creating relationships and talking with their friends and family, and it creates that synergy around your institution. That gets really difficult because it's hard to measure that. You don't know when the guy who came to your festival is going to talk to his mother, and the mother says, "Oh, I like them. I'm going to give them another $1,000 this year."
Right.
Like,
absolutely.
It could happen. And
It
if you
definitely
cancel
could.
that event, you might, that mother might decide, well, the hell with that place.
That's right. No, you're absolutely right. And I think, almost everything you do has the possibility to reach out and touch somebody and bring somebody into the fold, so to speak. And that person might become, a donor, they might become a volunteer, a member. You don't really know. And so doing those types of events where you're out in the public and, event that is not designed to make money and is just out there creating goodwill and PR and things, there's certainly a value to that. And probably people smarter than me can figure out how to put a monetary dollar value on that PR and that goodwill. But it's a challenge for sure.
Do you, can you share any, pitfalls or something that you see in budgets that people should steer clear from, or something that of course you want it to be balanced? I mean, that's
absolutely. I think when you're doing your organizational budget, of course you want it to be balanced, or preferably you want to have a profit
buffer.
That's funny. Just to bring that up for a second, that's the first question I asked my class when we start. I was like, what's a nonprofit? And does that mean you're not allowed to make money. And they're all like, I don't think you're allowed to make money. I was like, no, you're allowed to make money. It's okay. And if you're not making money, you're not going to be around very long. So,
Right.
that's not a bad word. But getting back to your question about, what's a pitfall, I think when people are working on project budgets, or if they're evaluating a project or an event or a program or something after it happened, and trying to figure out what the true cost of it was and how much revenue came in from the event, I think there is a tendency to not include staff time. And because staff time sort of just, you're going to be paying the staff whether they're working on that event or they're not working on it. So a lot of times people do a little, profit and loss statement for their event or their program, and they just put in the, the cost of printing and the cost of paying the speaker and all those explicit costs. Yeah. And they forget that, the program manager put in, 80 hours putting that thing together. Well, that's a cost. And so that in some cases that will turn an event from looking like a profitable event to an event that doesn't make a profit. And again, that's kind of where you get into that opportunity cost idea. Is like, well, if with all the staff time, maybe I would have been better off having our programs manager put that 80 hours in somewhere else in the organization. So I think that's something that, you want things to be successful, but you want them to, be truly successful. So you really got to give people the right picture when all said and done.
The other thing that I'm curious to hear your thoughts about are capital budgets, and sometimes mixing sometimes it'll happen, these capital things get put into the operational budget, and for sometimes they kind of have to, but other times it's better to keep them separated out.
Yeah, it's funny. I spent the last few months having this conversation with our executive committee here, because for a lot of board members that aren't, looking at finances all the time like I am, if they're only here for 4 or 6 board meetings a year and they're trying to wrap their head around where the finances are, they sort of forget how to read through things. And they're like, well, I know we have this grant out here, can't we use that money for this? And what's restricted versus not restricted. And so what I've kind of come up with a custom format where I try and present the purely operational results to our board members. And then kind of at the bottom of that statement, like an income statement, I talk about monies that they're aware that we have in our accounts from previous grants that might be restricted for a project or something. And I usually put them at the bottom and show, here's the money that I moved out of that grant account, and here's the money or here's what I paid with it. So if we put a new roof on a building, money came in, here's 50,000 coming in, there's 50,000 going out. So they see that money flowing in and out. And they know it doesn't have anything to do with our operation here, but they know that we're spending the money. They want to see that down at the bottom. Same thing with like our endowment account. Like when they see numbers that are like unrealized gains on the endowment, they're seeing these numbers, particularly the last couple of years, that are really big, and they're like, wow, we're making a lot of money. I was like, well, yes, but it's that number can go up and down, and it's not actual dollars in our pockets yet. They're it's gains or losses on paper. So I try and separate those things out to help them. And it's not what we usually talk about at the board meeting. It's not the format of a standard financial statement, but it's helpful for them to have those things broken apart. So
yeah, I mean, I think that the transparency and the conveying of the accurate information is more important than I've got to have this pure outputted QuickBooks report. And I mean, a lot of smaller institutions use QuickBooks.
We do.
One of the things that also becomes a challenge sometimes is like the cutoff for fiscal years, where some money will come in a certain fiscal year, but it doesn't, you're spending it the next fiscal year.
Yes.
You're spending this money and there's no corresponding income. Well, that income was the prior fiscal year. And that's where
Right.
QuickBooks, it just is challenging to get those numbers to convey actually what those numbers are doing.
Yeah. And similarly, we run into a little bit of confusion, in the last year with some of the COVID relief money, because some of those funds coming in are grants, like PPP, for example. It technically was a loan, but it's being forgiven, so it's more like a grant. But then there's other things that actually are loans that we've gotten, and so and we're using it for operations. So there's money going out to pay for operational expenses, but there's a loan is not income. It's it's a pot of cash that's sitting over here on the balance sheet, which is a little different. And some people have a hard time wrapping their heads around, well, we have this big negative number. How are we paying for those expenses? So I was like, well, we have a big pot of cash sitting over here. That's, it's like, if you buy a new car and take a loan, it's not like your income went up. You don't have higher income. Someone just gave you money and you have to pay that back. So there's all these sorts of strange sort of things that happen financially that sometimes people have a hard time wrapping their heads around. And so sometimes there's another statement called a cash flow statement that sometimes is more intuitive for board members to wrap their heads around. They're like, this is our cash coming in, this is our cash going out. Is it positive or negative?
Do you ever get into with students the real upside to donor advised gifts, but also sort of how that can be a management challenge too, where and you have to be careful when you talk about this, because there are a lot of donors that will give to a specific fund or for a specific project, and it's really, you got to keep those things sort of separated out. But that is also, we're talking about balancing act. How many different funds does an executive director wish to manage without sounding like, well, I don't need a candelabra fund. I need, just put it in the whatever fund. But that person might be really passionate about candelabras. So do you take their $1,500 and create a separate special fund for that? Or that is a real balancing act too.
Yeah. We have, I haven't gotten into it with the students in that detail, but it's a good topic that may be worthwhile talking about, because it's specifically for folks that are going to be in the collections side of things, so they're aware of that. But we have had that happen here, and as a matter of fact, this year I have $1,000 that's been sitting on the books for, I don't know, a decade, for the conservation of this map. The folks that gave us the map gave $1,000 for conservation work on it too. And for whatever reason, it's just never gotten done.
It sounds like a meatball, Mike. That's a meatball. You better get on that.
I know. At this point, it's a meatball. I've got a lot of meatballs. But
yeah,
it's fun.
It just didn't. It hasn't unfolded to get it done.
Yeah, I don't know why. So anyway, this year it's going up. It's going to go to Philadelphia, and it's going to get conserved. And we're going to basically say, here's the map. Here's $1,000. What's the most important things we can do for $1,000 for it, and I kind of go from there.
One of the things that maybe you can enlighten me. What do you do with the map project that's $942 to get it? What do you do with that money? Do you go back to the donor and say, look, there's 60 some dollars left, and then you have the people like, why are you bothering me with that?
I know,
kind of thing. But you really do, for the accounting side, you've got to figure out what to do with that. And sometimes it drives, especially with grants, where you've got $1 some left over. And
yeah, what are you supposed to do with that?
Yeah,
that's a good question. I have there was a air conditioning project that was done here before I came back, and there was like $1,400 left or something from the project, and we still have the $1,400. So I'm just putting it towards ongoing maintenance of the air conditioning unit, basically.
Okay.
And so
So
I
the
would think I would
cost of
do,
the original.
yeah, I would probably do something like that, and I don't know, make a print out a brochure or something. What I would do with the extra money
Of
for
course, if you're
something.
dealing with thousands of dollars, that's
That's
maybe when
different
you,
than $1.42. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. But there's
But
all these
yeah,
little
no,
quirky things, right?
it is.
People are unaware of.
It is. I think we've, you know, when you're dealing with larger dollar amounts and, you know, you get a project and it comes in under what you think it was, you know, I've always had good luck going back to the original grantor and saying, hey, we did this. It was, you know, X dollars left. You want me to send you a check? And they're usually like, nah, just take it and do whatever you want with it. Or, you know,
Mhm.
put it towards another capital project or whatever it might be, something similar to what they had done. So, and that's just, I think, just good practice to go back to people, especially if it's a foundation or somebody that's giving you funding, and say, you know, here's your money back if you want. And 9 times out of 10, they're usually like, just keep it. It's easy. It's easier for them, I think, in addition
Yeah.
to being easier for you.
Yeah, I mean it can become a what I kind of term as a fundraising arms race where you need funds coming in, and these projects are important, and then so you're cultivating donors to give to these projects, but then the funds that you're managing expand, and so you're just sort of this snowball effect of creating more projects that can help you solicit more funds because people
Yeah.
like the diversity, but then
Mhm.
you've just got this hairball of different projects that you're trying to manage.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a sort of a pet peeve of mine would be someone that is like, there's this grant that I heard about that's out there. Let's create a project so we can apply for it. Well, if we don't need that project, let's not create work just because there's a grant out there. If that was in our, you know, our plan to do that project anyway, and you happen to find funding for it, great, let's do it. But like, I don't want to, you know, make up projects just because you've discovered that there's a funder out there that may or may not, you know, fund it. Not only is it time consuming to write the grant, but then you have to manage a project that might not really be a institutional priority. So
Yeah. I had a treasurer one time. Uh, he was really good at not so much with like government grant. We wouldn't do it with government grants or the local county grant or something. But like with private donors, he was really good at conveying. Okay, thank you for the $10,000 for the new exhibit. Um, we really it costs our curator whatever
mhm.
$3,000. We're going to use this $10,000, and we're going to in our letter to you and in our budgeting, we're going to put that $3,000 is going to help pay that person's salary,
Mhm.
and 7,000 is going to be for paint and new cases and that kind of stuff.
Right.
Yeah. But I think institutions shouldn't be shy about just being upfront about that, and
Yeah,
just saying it.
I agree. I mean, it's costing money to do any of those projects, with staff time. So, you know, there are a variety of different grants that we even get to that are like, you can use this for anything, but you can't use it for salaries. I'm like, why? Like, that to me doesn't make sense. But because none of this is going to happen if you don't have someone who's being paid a salary helping it along in
Yeah,
some form or
it's
fashion. So
there's that funny story of the uh, town philanthropist who's really concerned about uh, infrastructure and kind of engineering, and he says, I'm going to give the city of X $100,000 for new traffic lights and new crosswalk things, and ADA accessible walkways and everything. But none of the money can go toward putting the lights in. It can't go toward maintaining the lights. It can't go toward the infrastructure to
like,
so then you got a big pot of money just sitting there.
yeah, so or you have a warehouse full of lights that can't be installed. So yeah.
Right. But you know, when you get a contractor that come to work at your institution as like a trades person who specializes in plaster work or brick laying or something, you darn well know their labor is tucked in there. I mean, they're
Oh,
just
yeah.
not charging you for the historic salmon bricks or whatever it is.
Right. Oh yeah, it's definitely in there, and it's not cheap.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So do you have at the historical society, do you guys have is there is there something you're really excited about in terms of, you know, what's gonna
what's going
be
on?
happening in the next few months or years? Is there a big vision or?
Yeah, I think a couple things that we've been doing. I'm kind of excited about some of the things that we've come up with in response to the pandemic, just because we've, like everybody else, have had to adapt to things. So, kind of creating some um, different ways of providing programming to people. Like everybody, I think, is kind of used to Zoom sessions and webinars and things at this point. But we had a really talented summer intern that I was working with. And I kind of gave him the task of like, we're in a historic district here. It's like a 5 block by 5 block area. I was like, I want to create some type of self-guided adventure in the historic district where people come and they buy a kit, and that kit goes out and leads them around the historic area. And they're kind of like, it's kind of like puzzle, mystery in a box, escape room in a box kind of thing.
Okay.
And they get out and they go around the district and they figure it out. And so we did that. So it's, what I like about it is it's analog. So it actually gets you physically have these pieces of paper and things that you're dealing with. You're out in the historic district, with your family or friend, whoever, that you're comfortable with being around during a pandemic, and you're going around, safely, and our guides aren't involved. All we do is hand over this box to you, and off you go. So I thought that was a cool
Yeah.
solution, and I'm excited about having it. So that's going pretty well so far. And
Put the
then
word escape room on anything now and people
pretty
just
much,
go crazy. Yeah.
yeah,
That's,
they're fun. I love them. I'm guilty of it too, for sure.
yeah.
And then we're also starting up a historic foodways program here. None of the other museums here in Newcastle really are involved in foodways in any way. And we have restored our kitchen fireplace in our Amstel House Museum. So the hearth is in working condition. The fireplace is in great shape. We're still going to be working on a bake oven at some point. But for right now, we can at least start getting things rolling. So our new public programs manager has a background in foodways. So I've kind of tasked her with, hey, let's get this ball rolling. And we see it as kind of not only the topic of historic food, but also as a way to interpret the lives of people that were working in that household that are not part of the family that was living there. So they were the people that were enslaved in the household, the indentured workers, hired workers. And I think it'll allow us to reach into those stories a little bit better than we have in the past.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, I have a lightning round that we're going to close with, but first, I asked if you had any funny stories to share or a funny story to share about from your career.
This was a tough one too. And, I have a million funny stories, but I can't share them all necessarily publicly. So
Right.
I asked some colleagues that I worked with in the past, and they're like, well, I know what you can tell them. And so they gave me a hint. And I guess the one thing that surprised me in a humorous sort of way was when I came to museums, I didn't expect to find so many dead bodies in museums. Like literally places that I've worked have been littered with dead bodies, from dead squirrels to dead deer to dead rabbits.
Not human.
Not humans. No, I haven't found any human remains yet.
The executive director that didn't quite make it.
It's like, what do you do when you're an executive director? Well, you got to go find that squirrel that crawled into your kitchen and died somewhere. He's there. You just can't find him.
Ugh. And they start to stink after a while.
They do. The one guy I found, he at least had the common courtesy to crawl into the bottom of the trash bag and like die at the bottom, but I couldn't find him for like 2 weeks. So it was
Yeah.
awful. So that's as good as it gets. Every day's an adventure.
Birds that get up in historical society buildings is a common problem, right?
Yes, they are. Yeah, they either come down your chimney or fly in through an open door when it's there.
Yeah. Or
They're
they
everywhere.
wake you up in the middle of the night, the alarm company calling you.
That happens too often.
I got a call one time. It must have been 3 or 4 in the morning, and I couldn't get a hold of our maintenance guy. And so I drove in. Sure enough, there was this bird flying around in one of our buildings, workshop spaces, and it was a funny sight. I was barely out of my pajamas and chasing a bird around in this building, and finally got it out. But
that's what you want to do at 3 a.m.
Yeah. So before we close, I'm going to give you a either or option, and you choose, and you can elaborate if you want. If you don't want to elaborate, you don't have to. So the first question is Guinness or Dogfish Head. If you had to choose, if you're on death row.
I'm going Guinness.
Guinness. Okay.
Guinness for strength.
It's a lot from someone in Delaware. I can't believe
Look at this face.
that.
Oh my God.
All right, bagpipes or an accordion?
Ooh, tough call. I'll take the bagpipes.
Okay. With a name like Connelly?
What's that? Well, yeah, there's, I don't have any Scottish actually, I don't think. But,
it's Scottish, yeah.
The Irish do have some pipes, but they're a little bit.
Yeah, Connelly's Irish, right?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, clay pigeon shooting or mini golf?
Ooh, I think I'm better at mini golf, so I'm going to go with that. Clay pigeon shooting is kind of fun, though.
Have you ever been?
I have, yeah.
Really?
I was terrible, and I'm not great at mini golf, but.
Is it true? I mean, you see those guys and pull, and then they just snap them right out of the air. Does it really happen like that?
Yeah, if you're good, but
good.
Yeah, I can't do it. But
how is it even possible? I mean, it's shot, I guess.
It's shot. Yeah, it's a shotgun, so it's a little bit easier to hit. But yeah, I guess if you're, like you said, more coordinated than I am. It's a good thing I don't have to hunt for my meals.
Yeah, me too. Well, anything you want to plug before we close? I'm going to put the of course, I'll put Newcastle Historical Society website and I'll put University of Delaware program on there too, the link on there if you want me to.
Yeah, that'd be great. That's
okay.
Both those things are good. I don't have anything in particular to plug specifically. So just people, hopefully we'll be launching a whole new website soon. So right now, if you go to our website, it's just basically a landing page with some basic information there. But yeah, please, we'll be adding more, virtual events. So check us out.
When will the kits, if someone is visiting Newcastle, when do you think the kits will be ready to go for picking up? And
they are ready right now. And yeah, you can come to our visitor center, pick them up, or just get in touch with us and we'll mail them to you. So you don't even have to come directly to us. Yeah.
All right.
So we're happy to do either one.
Yeah. Okay. And well, thank you again for your time.
Yeah, no, thanks for having us. It was fun, Jason.
Yeah, this has been fun.
Yeah, good to talk to you.
All right, Mike. Take care.
All right, take care, Jason.
Bye.
Bye.